I can go back a couple of years in our text messages and look at a message from you shortly after you woke up in, I forget where, somewhere in Afghanistan.
Mazar Sharif, yeah.
Yeah, Mazar. Realizing that you went to bed and Afghanistan was still Afghanistan and Hamid Karzai was still the president and all these other things. And
Ghani.
Oh, that was Ghani at that time, yes. And you woke up and the Taliban was in control and you were far from anywhere. Can you take me back?
Yeah, so I was in Afghanistan in 2021. Oh my gosh, time flies. I was there with a photographer friend of mine, Jake, who was also Australian, and we'd agreed to go back in that summer. And I felt that it was really going to be an important story because that was going to be sort of the end of this 20-year war and that the US was going to leave. And it was funny because I had sort of pitched this story as being important to different places and had just recently left a long career at Fox. And there really wasn't a lot of interest, so let me put it that way. And which blew my mind because I thought, this is a big story. And yet it felt like there just wasn't any interest. And I guess news editors at that point just assumed that the US was going to get in a helicopter and leave and the Afghans were going to take over and that was going to be the story. But it certainly felt to me like that wasn't going to be the case. I didn't expect things to transpire as quickly as they did, but I certainly figured it wasn't going to be a smooth.
There's a lot of people in the government that would agree with you.
Yes,
didn't see it happening that fast.
But it sort of it started to feel quite inevitable in that summer. So anyway, we go back, we're traveling. I remember going past these bases. This is about a week before the fall and just seeing soldiers walking home with their weapon and
Afghan soldiers?
Yeah, or some of them, left their weapon and walked home. And I remember talking to them and asking, where are you going? And they said, well, we're leaving. We're done. So-and-so, our leader left
Mm-hmm.
And to me that just, it felt very shocking. And so anyway, each day, you're talking to different officials who were all swearing by the fact that Afghanistan wasn't going to fall and all these brave leaders were going to, continue this fight. But it was just very apparent that the Taliban were taking province after province. And at that point, and someone whose home that I'd been to before in Ankara, and that was Dostum. And of course, his area, being an Uzbek, is the north in Mazar. And he invited me to go and kind of embed with him and his troops. And again, to sort of show what this fight was about and how the Afghans were going to continue fighting. And so I went to Mazar. And we had a flight, and it was only supposed to be sort of a few days trip, I think 4 or 5 days. And we had a flight back, I remember it, for the Sunday. And I think we got up there maybe on the Wednesday. And just day by day, you could start to feel the first day, so much energy, the markets are filled, everybody's doing their thing and things felt very jubilant. But I remember kind of walking around thinking how strange it was that I didn't see a single soldier or policeman, or I didn't hear a single helicopter overhead. And yet all the provinces around Mazar, Kunduz, etc., had all already just fallen and people were fleeing to Mazar. And I just remember thinking it was strange. It felt like the Wild West and not how you think a province that was on the verge of being taken over because everything around it, that is what happened. And this just felt like it was completely abandoned. And
you knew kind of what to look for. This wasn't your first time in a war zone. This wasn't your first time in the middle of a collapse of a government.
Yeah.
You've been around a little bit at this point.
And so sort of at the beginning, there was a certain sense of surety maybe on that first day or two. And then as the days progressed, it just started to feel more somber. And people were the attitude was changing. People were trying to get to Kabul. And then the morning, so then we hit Friday, and that Friday night I went out with sort of a special forces commando group, Afghan soldiers, and they were quite in the thick of fighting. And again, they were very patriotic, very, people that I think very, very committed to the fight, unlike, the soldiers I'd seen kind of walking away. And we sort of stayed with them till about 2 or 3 in the morning. And I just sort of remember them sort of talking. They didn't want us to leave, but they were so sure that, they swore up and down that Afghanistan was never going to fall, and they're certainly not their area. And Dostum kept pushing our meeting back and back and back. And Saturday morning, I woke up with very little sleep, and I remember kind of just bursting into tears for no reason when I woke up. And again, it goes back to my theory of the body never lies. Sometimes your body knows things before you do, of like preparing you for something that's going to happen that you don't know what. And I remember that morning, and it was just so eerie because, we went out and people were just lining up around the block, around their bank to get money out of the bank, to withdraw whatever they had. I remember people fleeing, like seeing just tuk-tuks of people fleeing into the city with, the bags of whatever they could bring, because they were fleeing the outskirts where the fighting just appeared to be getting closer and closer. And I remember we were trying to call different interpreters or different fixers in that area to take us places, and everybody had left. Everyone had gone to Kabul or was trying to get away. And we ended up, finally being put in touch with a random person who was driving us somewhere, and then he sort of stopped at one point and got a call on his flip phone, and he sort of turned around and looked at us and said, the fighting is basically a mile from here, and we can't go any further. And of course, we didn't want to put him in any kind of precarious situation, so we sort of said okay. And then I'm making calls to, again, the Afghan intelligence people that I knew in Kabul, who were still at that point saying Mazar is not going to fall, at least not immediately, at least not for many days. And at that point, what was really going on was that Taliban had surrounded the city. Dostum had actually fled to Uzbekistan, and the commandos that we'd been with the night before, I was messaging with them, and they were sort of saying how many of them had died, and the ones that were left, again, were all trying to line up to get out. And basically that was sort of done. And again, I was hearing so many mixed messages from, again, Kabul to what was happening on the ground to sort of what you're seeing on social media. So it kind of felt very strange because you're in this bubble where you're not really sure what to believe, but you're trying to stay calm and figure it out. And so we kind of went out to get something to eat. It was a Saturday, and I just remember there was nobody around. And this is a city that's usually really bustling. Nobody was around. And this little restaurant we went to, which normally, had music had hookah and music, and it was all just dead silent. It was open, but it was dead silent. And Jake and I sort of looked at each other and we said, something's not right. We got to go. And we kind of hurried back. And it was just dark at that time. And we hurried back toward our hotel. And as we're hurrying back, you see all the motorcycles come in, which was the Taliban. And sort of by the time we got back to the hotel, we went to the roof. It was the tallest building in the city. So you could look down and you saw just a whole bunch of Taliban come in and basically take over the city without firing a single shot, essentially, aside from their celebration shots. There was definitely no fight. And that's what it was. That was the takeover. And again, you're sort of in the middle of this bubble because you're seeing what's happening, but you're also trying to justify that maybe it's not what it looks like. And then at that point, I think one of my old Afghan fixers who I'd worked with on a previous trip, who was based in London, I was messaging with him, and he was sort of the first one who said to me, yeah, I'm sorry, Mazar's fallen. And that was kind of the confirmation that I didn't want to hear, even though I knew. He was sort of the first one, I guess, from the outside to confirm it. And so that was a Saturday night. So we're watching all this unfold. And then, of course, my phone starts blowing up with people, and
I was one of those people.
Yeah, and I was just trying to get my head around, what is it that I needed to do next? Yeah.
So August 14th, 2021, I pulled this up in WhatsApp.
Okay.
Hey, Hollie, we're seeing reports that Mazar fell. Is that true? And if so, did you make it out okay? And you responded 2 minutes later. Thank you for the quick response, because I was very worried. Yes, it has, and no, I am under siege. The Taliban is outside, but I don't think that they will enter the hotel. I am trying to get out first daylight. You're sitting in your hotel room. There's Taliban outside. You've been around Taliban before, but now it's different. Now it's clear they're in control now, and it's different. And you've got to be wondering, where do I stand as a woman, as a foreigner, as a journalist?
Yeah.
These are all things that are potentially could make you a target for a hostile takeover by the Taliban. What was your sort of, you're assessing the situation right there. You're staring at these guys right out your window. And it's like, how do you even get up the courage to leave the hotel at that point? Because obviously you eventually did.
Yeah. So there's all these unknowns. And I think that's what made it difficult because, I knew the Taliban wasn't ISIS. If it was ISIS, we're in big trouble. But I knew the Taliban wasn't ISIS. But I also I didn't know what to expect from it. I didn't know what it was going to look like. And again, they just literally, there's hundreds of them. It's an absolute, that you can't just kind of sneak out situation. That wasn't going to be the case. And so we thought, well, maybe there's a way to get out, first thing that morning. And I'm in touch with different people and of course,
probably trying to make a break for it through the Uzbek border, maybe.
And we're trying to but the Uzbek border was closed, I think, at that point. And, it's funny, again, that night.
Because you weren't the only one with that idea,
sure,
I'm sure.
Yeah. So then that night, we, and you get that notification about your flight being canceled because our flight out was going to be the Sunday. And so, there's just a whole bunch of unknowns and a lot of people, telling you different things. And there's, of course, the first, I woke up the next, probably didn't sleep, but maybe for an hour. And you woke up and it felt like a really different place. You sort of felt like you were plunged back into a medieval time. Just looking out the window, things just looked very different that first morning. And there's still a lot of celebrations. The Taliban sort of celebrated all night, and there was a lot of their prayers and nasheeds and so it felt very different. And I'm trying to kind of navigate this. I'm still trying to kind of work a little bit and try to explain what's going on. And then so cut a long story short. So days are going by. Eventually I did get Jake to go out into the market to buy me a burqa because I thought, well, that's going to be the best way to figure out how to at least kind of disguise myself a little bit to get out of here. And I'm in touch with all sorts of different people.
And what's more dangerous at that point, being a man out and about, a Westerner, a male, or being a female? I really don't know. And it almost feels like if I'm in that situation myself, I'd almost feel like, I don't know, I feel like we're both screwed, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Jake got away with it a little bit because he's got a Malaysian background, but they often sort of passed as a Hazara. So, and he had the beard and everything, so he could sort of disguise himself a little bit to get away with it.
I've never met Jake. I've corresponded with him. I've paid his invoices, all these different things.
He's a great human.
I've never met him, but I have a picture in my head of who he is. Malaysian was not in my head.
Very Aussie, but just a wonderful human. So I was really glad that I had him because so many reporting trips I do, I'm usually by myself. Which may well been the case in Afghanistan too, because everyone I had known had left, including the person who'd invited me to be there. So I'm really glad that I had Jake and I sort of we had it was a team effort, so to speak. So days are going by. The hotel is sort of running out of food. And again, trying to piece together what's going on, how to get out of here. And eventually someone sort of said, and eventually I sort of looked at it and I thought, well, the Taliban is having these talks with the United States that have been going in Doha for a long time. They're obviously in touch with them in Kabul because Kabul fell the next day. That fell on the Sunday. And so with sort of the State Department contact in Kabul that I was messaging with, I said to him, I think I could talk to the Taliban. Like, I don't see a way out of this without talking to the Taliban. I think that is the only way. And to his credit, he didn't kind of balk at it and be like, oh, absolutely not. He was like, well, that could be an option. Let me think about it, go and talk to someone. And then So we sort of sat on that. I'm like waiting to hear. And the more that I kind of researched and talked to different Afghans that I knew, and a lot of Afghans in America that had left, and I had one good friend of mine we called Jack. He was from Mazar, so he had dealt with the Taliban a lot himself. He'd worked as an interpreter for the US. Fortunately, he's passed away now, but he'd worked for the US. He said, look, my uncle was Taliban, I think, he wasn't maybe as alarmist as so many people were. And he said, I think that's the best way. He was the one that was really encouraging me to talk to the Taliban. And so eventually, it was like, again, trying to figure it out. And then randomly, I got a call, and I don't fully know who orchestrated it. I have some ideas, but I got a call from a young guy who was sort of one of the family. They owned Cam Air, which was one of the Afghan airlines, and who was in contact with the Taliban. And he was kind of facilitator. And he said, look, I think, you should talk to the Taliban and just kind of get your stuff ready, basically is what he said. Let me figure something out, get your stuff ready. So Jake and I kind of packed up our stuff, really didn't know what was going on. And then we were told to go to the basement of this hotel that we were staying at. And at this point, we knew we had to sort of figure out a way to get out, because the people that were working there, sweet Afghans, they were worried about their families. Again, food was running out. Like, everybody just needed to get home and figure out what this sort of new normal looked like. So we go down to the basement of this hotel, and then I'm told to get in this car. And there was 2 Taliban elders. And so we were in the car with these 2 Taliban elders and driving through Mazar, and they sort of said, welcome. It was, and then of course, my journalist mode sort of kicks in, and I said, well, can I sort of ask you questions? And so we just started asking them questions. And again, I didn't really know where I was going at this point or what was happening. And so I started asking questions about their beliefs, and they're reciting a lot of very traditional Taliban ideals of, the woman's role, and but yet was so very kind of welcoming of me at the same time, which was sort of strange. And I sort of said that I wanted to sort of, and I wasn't sure what the media landscape was. And they basically said, well, yeah, you can stay. It was not what I was sort of expecting at all. Cut a long story short, they took us to the Uzbekistan embassy there, or consulate. And I think that had been, orchestrated by the American ambassador, who was so wonderful in Uzbekistan. And he had arranged for them to kind of open the border. And then a different Taliban, young sort of bunch of Talibans then escorted us to the border. So then we sort of end up in Uzbekistan, but both Jake and I was sort of like, the story's really not over yet. Like, there was just this sense of unease. Like, I wasn't going to get on a plane and come home, much to the dismay of my family and friends that I, So again, we then made the decision, well, we're going to go back, because all my stuff, my house, my room, everything was set up in Kabul. So I still had my quote unquote second home there. And so we discussed it sort of for a couple of days and figured out, how we were going to get the money, because obviously the banks and everything had shut down in Afghanistan. So it was a little bit of a blessing, I suppose, to have that opportunity just to kind of figure it out a little bit. And then we went back, and I found a driver. Again, all these contacts. I ended up calling someone I knew who worked for the Indian government who knew a driver. So it's just the most random sensibilities of people. I was like, well, I need someone to drive me all the way from this border, which is about a 12, 13-hour trip back to Kabul. And, this is just after the takeover, and the US, was on the final stretch there of leaving at that point. And so we made that journey back to Kabul and back to the house that I was staying in. It's suddenly in a very different life and world. And the next day we went to the Ministry of Information and got our permission letters. And I had to randomly find a new fixer on LinkedIn, because everybody I knew had left. And that's what began then my next sort of journey of reporting for the next 5 months in Afghanistan.